An empty 4-foot aquarium can look like nothing more than glass and possibility. But this one was carrying a history I needed to erase before I could build anything beautiful inside it. It had recently been used as a temporary treatment tank for fish dealing with internal parasites. The fish recovered, returned to their larger home, and left behind a bare floor covered with what looked like ordinary brown debris. Up close, though, that dust was not dust at all. It was a maze of tiny shelters built by detritus worms from leftover organic matter. In a stocked aquarium, fish usually keep these worms hidden and their numbers low. In an empty, bare-bottom tank with no predators, they had taken over. That small detail was a reminder of something important. Every aquarium becomes an ecosystem, even when we think nothing is happening. Before I could create a clean, controlled aquascape, I had to remove the remains of the old system and start with a blank foundation. The goal for this build was very different from the natural, low-energy tanks I usually prefer. I wanted a high-energy planted aquarium, built around stone, carpeting plants, bright color, strong light, and injected carbon dioxide. The visual inspiration came from Iwagumi, the Japanese rock garden style that uses carefully placed stones and open negative space to create a feeling of scale. But I did not want to copy a strict competition layout or follow every traditional rule. I wanted the tank to feel like a windswept valley, with a low green carpet flowing around dark rocks and a wall of colorful stems rising behind them. The fish would not be the main decoration. They would be movement inside a living landscape. That decision immediately changed how the tank had to be built. A slow, low-tech aquarium can survive on restraint. It can use less light, modest plant growth, and a substrate that releases nutrients gradually. A high-energy carpet tank is more demanding. The plants are expected to spread quickly, stay compact, and compete with algae under intense lighting. That means the substrate must support roots, the water flow must distribute carbon dioxide, and the maintenance must match the speed of the system. If any one of those pieces falls behind, algae usually takes advantage first. I began with the substrate because the visible surface is only the final layer of a much larger system. At the bottom, I added coarse gravel. The purpose was not to feed the plants directly. It was to create structure, prevent the deepest layers from becoming too tightly compacted, and give me inexpensive height without filling the entire aquarium with active soil. On top of that went a mixture of older aquasoil, sand, and gravel from previous builds. Used substrate is often treated as waste, but it can be valuable as a bulk layer when it is still clean and stable. It may no longer carry the same nutrient charge it had when new, but it can still support shape and root penetration. The next layer was the nutrient-rich material. This was placed closer to the surface, where new roots could reach it once they pushed down through the topsoil. Then, a fresh cap of aquasoil covered everything. The final surface looked clean and uniform, while the layers underneath did different jobs. The gravel created depth. The reused material built the slope. The nutrient layer supported long-term growth. Fresh aquasoil provided the planting surface and the visual finish. The shape mattered as much as the materials. Instead of making the substrate perfectly level, I raised the outer areas and created a shallow dip through the center. A completely flat bed can make rocks look as though they were placed on a table. A slope or depression creates direction. It suggests that water, wind, or erosion shaped the landscape. Even before the first stone entered the tank, the substrate was already guiding the viewer's eye. For the hardscape, I chose dark rock with rusty mineral patches. The texture was rough, irregular, and full of natural contrast. The largest stone went in first because it would determine the scale and direction of everything around it. This is one of the easiest ways to avoid a random-looking layout. Start with the dominant piece, angle it with intention, and then place the smaller stones as if they broke away from the same formation. They do not need to be identical, but they should feel related. Traditional Iwagumi layouts often use an odd number of stones, and there is a practical reason this usually looks natural. Even numbers can create pairs, symmetry, and visual balance that feels designed. Odd numbers are harder for the eye to divide evenly, so the arrangement tends to feel more organic. I started with that principle, but the layout kept asking for more material. Each unused stone had a shape that seemed to continue the ridge, fill a gap, or strengthen the transition into the substrate. Eventually, nearly every piece went into the tank. The result was not strict Iwagumi. It was a rock-focused, planted landscape inspired by Iwagumi. That difference matters because aquascaping rules should help us see, not prevent us from creating. If a stone looks wrong, move it. If the composition feels too balanced, break the symmetry. If a piece is beautiful but does not support the landscape, leave it out. The most useful rule is not about a specific number of rocks. It is this: every stone should look as though it belongs to the same place. Once the hardscape was set, the tank changed from a construction project into a planting project. The foreground would use several textures rather than one single species. Hairgrass would provide fine vertical blades. Glossostigma would spread with small round leaves close to the soil. Lilaeopsis would form slightly taller grassy clumps around the stones. Using different plants in the same low-growing zone can make a carpet look more natural, but it also creates a challenge. Each species grows at a different speed. If planted carelessly, the strongest plant can overwhelm the others. The preparation took longer than the planting itself. Tissue culture and potted carpeting plants often arrive in dense clumps. Planting those clumps whole may seem faster, but it usually produces a few thick islands with empty soil between them. Dividing each portion into many small plugs creates more growing points across the entire foreground. It looks sparse on day one, but it closes faster and more evenly over time. Every small plug had to be pushed into the aquasoil with tweezers and anchored deeply enough that it would not float when the tank was filled. Around the stones, I kept the planting irregular. Straight rows would have destroyed the natural effect. Some gaps were left open. Some clumps were planted tightly. Others were spaced farther apart. That variation is what allows a carpet to look like it grew into the landscape, rather than being installed like artificial turf. Filling a freshly planted aquarium can undo hours of work in seconds. A strong stream of water can lift aquasoil, expose lower layers, uproot tiny plugs, and turn the entire tank into brown soup. To avoid that, I placed soft filter material on the substrate and poured the water onto it slowly. The first part went well, but after shifting the fill point to a back corner, the flow found a weak spot and pulled fine soil into the water column. The tank became cloudier than planned. This is where preparation saves panic. The filter had already been kept alive while the aquarium was empty by running its inlet and outlet on another established tank. That meant the biological media remained wet, oxygenated, and active. Instead of starting with a sterile filter, the new aquascape began with a mature colony of bacteria ready to process waste. Once the filter was reconnected, the cloudiness began to settle, and by the following day, the water was clear. Then came the feature that would define the entire build: injected carbon dioxide. Many aquarists see carbon dioxide systems as complicated or dangerous, but the basic job is simple. Plants use carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. In a brightly lit aquarium packed with demanding plants, the amount naturally dissolved in the water is often too low to support fast, compact growth. Adding a controlled supply allows the plants to use the available light more effectively. The system consisted of a pressurized cylinder, a regulator, tubing, a diffuser, and a timer. The diffuser broke the gas into a fine mist of bubbles. The filter outlet was aimed so that the current would carry those bubbles across the tank, rather than allowing them to rise immediately to the surface. The timer started the gas before the lights came on and stopped it before the lights went off. This gave the aquarium time to build a useful concentration during the period when the plants needed it. At this point, the tank looked clean, planted, and promising. It was also entering the most dangerous stage of a high-energy build: There was fresh aquasoil releasing nutrients, intense light shining on open surfaces, young plants that had not yet established roots, and carbon dioxide encouraging rapid biological activity. That combination can create explosive plant growth, but it can also create explosive algae growth. The next few weeks would reveal which one gained control first. When I returned after some time away, the answer was both. The plants had begun to spread, but brown diatoms and green film had appeared across the glass and rocks. This is where many people make the wrong decision. They see algae in a new tank and assume the entire setup has failed. They reduce everything at once, scrub every surface, replace large amounts of media, add chemicals, and disturb the aquarium before it has had a chance to stabilize. The algae in this tank was not surprising. Slow-growing foreground plants were surrounded by fresh nutrients and strong light. They were not yet large enough to consume everything available. Algae occupied the temporary gap. Instead of treating it as a catastrophe, I treated it as a stage. The glass was cleaned. A water change removed suspended waste and excess nutrients. The filter remained untouched. Most importantly, the planting plan was adjusted. The background had been intentionally left open because I wanted to decide later which colors would best frame the stones. That empty space was visually useful, but biologically it was a weakness. Fast-growing stem plants are powerful competitors during the early life of an aquarium. They absorb nutrients quickly, create shade, and provide a large mass of active leaves. By delaying them, I had given algae a larger opportunity. So I harvested healthy stems from another established aquarium and planted them densely behind the rock ridge. Red and green plants created the backdrop I had imagined, but their first job was not decoration. Their first job was nutrient control. This was the midpoint where the aquarium stopped behaving like a collection of separate parts and began functioning as a complete planted system. The carpet handled the foreground. The stems consumed energy in the background. The filter processed waste. The current distributed carbon dioxide. Each element reduced the pressure on the others. The next addition was a cleanup crew, but not as a substitute for maintenance. Amano shrimp were chosen because they are active grazers and particularly useful in planted aquariums. They can remove soft algae from rock, wood, and plant leaves without damaging healthy growth. A group was acclimated and released into the tank. Within a short period, they began working across the surfaces, picking through the brown film and green patches. It is important to understand what these shrimp can and cannot do. They cannot fix poor carbon dioxide distribution. They cannot compensate for lighting that is far too strong. They cannot stop algae caused by constant overfeeding. What they can do is control background growth while the plants establish themselves. In a balanced system, they are support. In an unbalanced system, they become a temporary mask. Over the following weeks, the difference became dramatic. Glossostigma began sending runners through the aquasoil. Each runner created another plant, and each new plant created more runners. The sparse plugs merged into a dense green carpet. Hairgrass filled the finer spaces with upright texture. Lilaeopsis softened the edges around the rocks. The background stems reached the surface, gained color, and began to form a solid wall behind the hardscape. Carbon dioxide made the speed possible, but it also increased the need for discipline. A high-energy aquarium is not more difficult because the equipment is complicated. It is more demanding because everything happens faster. Plants grow faster. Nutrients are used faster. Algae can appear faster. Problems that might take weeks to become visible in a low-tech aquarium can become obvious in days. That is why water changes, trimming, and observation matter more here than in a slower system. The first major trim was not only cosmetic. When stem plants are cut, the lower portions often produce multiple new shoots. Replanting the healthy tops increases density. One tall stem can become several shorter growing points, and after repeating that process, the background transforms from a sparse group of vertical lines into a thick, planted wall. The same principle applies to carpeting plants. Trimming the top can encourage horizontal growth and prevent the lower layers from becoming shaded and weak. This was also the point where the best design decision in the entire build became obvious. It was not the expensive soil, the carbon dioxide cylinder, or the choice of rock. It was patience combined with planting density. On the first day, the foreground looked unfinished because the plants had been divided into small plugs. If I had tried to force an instant carpet by planting large clumps close together, the surface might have looked fuller for a week, but the roots would have been crowded, the lower leaves could have melted, and the carpet would have spread unevenly. By accepting an empty-looking start, the tank gained a healthier finish. After roughly a month, the aquascape looked completely different. The carpet was nearly closed. The rocks were no longer sitting on top of the substrate, they appeared embedded in vegetation. The background had enough height and color to create depth without hiding the stone formation. The water remained clear, and the early algae had faded as the plants took control. A surprising detail appeared during this period. A tiny juvenile fish was discovered swimming alone in the aquarium before any fish had been intentionally added. The most likely explanation was that an egg or very small fry had traveled through the filter system while the equipment was temporarily connected to another tank. It was a perfect example of how life moves through an aquarium in ways we do not always see. Filters, plants, nets, and water can all carry microscopic passengers. Once the plants were established and the tank had shown stable behavior, it was ready for fish. The selection had to complement the aquascape rather than compete with it. A large, colorful school would create motion across the open green foreground. Pearl gouramis would add slower, more graceful movement in the upper and middle water. Blue emperor tetras would bring an indigo sheen, while cardinal tetras would add a sharp line of red and blue against the green carpet. Otocinclus catfish would graze gently on surfaces and support long-term algae control. The fish were added only after temperature acclimation and careful observation. They had come from compatible systems and were introduced in groups large enough to reduce stress. This matters especially for schooling fish and Otocinclus. A lone specimen may survive, but a group behaves more naturally, feeds more confidently, and spreads social pressure across several individuals. As the lights came back on, the aquarium changed again. The plants created the landscape, but the fish revealed its scale. A dark stone that looked medium-sized without fish suddenly appeared massive when a small tetra crossed in front of it. The open central dip became a swimming corridor. The slow pearl gouramis contrasted with the quick schooling movement below them. The aquascape was no longer a still image. It had rhythm. There is a temptation to judge a planted tank on the day it is built, especially when social media is full of finished aquascapes photographed at their peak. But a real aquarium is not finished when the water goes in. The first layout is only a framework. The plants must decide how they will grow through it. The roots must stabilize the soil. The filter must adapt to the new biological load. Algae must appear, be managed, and lose its advantage. Fish must settle into the space. This tank taught me that patience is not passive. Patience in aquascaping means giving the system time while still making the right adjustments. It means cleaning the glass without tearing apart the substrate. It means adding fast-growing plants when the tank needs more competition. It means using shrimp as support instead of expecting them to solve the cause. It means trimming before stems become weak, and waiting until the aquarium is stable before filling it with fish. The biggest difference between this build and a low-tech natural aquarium is not that one is better. They reward different kinds of care. A low-tech tank rewards restraint and long-term balance. A high-tech tank rewards consistency and precision. Carbon dioxide does not replace good husbandry. It magnifies whatever system you create. If the light, flow, nutrients, and maintenance are coordinated, the result can be extraordinary. If they are not, the same speed that grows a carpet can also grow algae. One of the easiest mistakes with injected carbon dioxide is to chase a bubble count instead of watching the aquarium. Two tanks can receive the same number of bubbles and still have completely different carbon dioxide levels because their surface movement, diffuser efficiency, water volume, and circulation are different. The useful question is not how many bubbles are passing through the counter. The useful question is whether the gas reaches the entire planted area before escaping. In this layout, the filter outlet had to push the fine mist over the carpet and around the stone ridge. Dead zones behind large rocks could leave plants carbon-starved even when the diffuser appeared to be working perfectly. Consistency is also safer than constant adjustment. Plants adapt to a regular daily pattern. If the carbon dioxide level is strong one day, weak the next, and late the day after that, plant growth becomes less predictable and algae gains opportunities. A timer removes that uncertainty. The gas begins before the lighting period, reaches a useful level as photosynthesis starts, and shuts off before darkness. At night, the plants stop consuming carbon dioxide, so continuing to inject it only wastes gas and can reduce oxygen available to fish. Lighting must follow the same logic. More light does not automatically create better growth. Light is the accelerator. Carbon dioxide and nutrients are the fuel. Pressing the accelerator harder when the fuel supply is inconsistent creates stress, not speed. During the early weeks, the lighting period should be long enough to support growth, but controlled enough that the young plant mass can use what it receives. As the carpet thickens and the stems become dense, the aquarium can process more energy. Until then, restraint is often the faster route. The livestock also changes the maintenance equation. Before fish were added, the system had very little daily waste. After the schools entered, feeding introduced nitrogen, phosphorus, and organic particles every day. That does not mean the aquarium suddenly became unstable. It means the nutrient input became continuous. The plant mass was now large enough to absorb much of it. The mature filter could process the biological load, and the cleanup crew could graze on surfaces. Adding the same number of fish during the first week would have placed that load on a tank whose plants were still adapting and whose algae was already looking for an advantage. Feeding had to remain controlled. Schooling fish create the illusion that every individual is starving because they rush toward food with so much energy. But a beautiful aquascape can be damaged slowly by a small excess at every meal. Uneaten particles fall into the carpet, collect between stones, and decompose where they are difficult to remove. A little less food, delivered carefully, keeps the fish healthy while protecting the clean lines of the layout. The finished aquarium will still require work. The carpet must be trimmed before its upper layer blocks light from reaching the roots. Stem plants must be cut and replanted before they shade the foreground. Filter flow must be checked as the media collects debris. The rocks may need occasional brushing. None of this means the design failed. Maintenance is not a repair job performed on a broken aquarium. It is part of the design from the beginning. That is why access matters. A dramatic stone arrangement can look impressive, but become frustrating if every gap traps waste and no tool can reach behind it. A dense carpet can look flawless, but become unhealthy if it is allowed to grow into a thick, floating mat. The most successful aquascape is not simply the one that looks best on its peak day. It is the one that can be kept near that peak without exhausting the person caring for it. Now the aquarium has become what the empty glass only hinted at. A dark stone valley covered in bright green growth, backed by colorful stems and filled with moving schools of fish. The early cloudiness is gone. The diatoms are gone. The plants that once looked like scattered plugs now form a connected landscape. And the most satisfying part is that the finished look was not created in a single day. It was earned through each small decision, each correction, and each week of growth. If you are planning your own carpeted aquarium, remember this. Do not build only for the first photograph. Build for the way the tank will behave after a month, after a trim, and after the fish begin producing waste. Give the roots somewhere to go. Give the water a clear path to circulate. Give the plants enough carbon to use the light. Add fast growers before algae forces you to. And most of all, give the aquarium enough time to become the landscape you imagined. If you enjoyed watching this tank develop from a bare treatment aquarium into a fully planted, high-energy aquascape, subscribe for more builds that explain not only what was done, but why it worked. And tell me in the comments, would you keep this setup high-tech with carbon dioxide, or would you try to create a similar rock and carpet layout using a slower, low-tech method?